next one, I am sure, is going to be just as great. We're for those of you
Yes.
out there, we have the one, the only AP Strange making his way
And
through
he's
the
here.
ether. He's here,
Amazing.
and
Voting to panelist.
we know him. We
And
we love
here
him.
we go. Hello.
The
Unmute.
hello. There he
Hi.
is.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Good. Good.
I
We're
can't
doing
believe
really
you're
well.
here. This is our last panel of the conference.
I
I
know.
Again,
it's-
what is time? That's been the theme all weekend. But anyway, I'm excited. We're happy to have
Time
you.
is but an illusion. You know.
Very true.
And it's fine because we're all having so much fun.
That's it.
Yeah, as long as
Exactly.
we got floors to lay down on, we're.
Make anything a floor, right?
It's true. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Welcome.
All right, then.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad you guys asked me to be on. I was a little nervous, but there's been so much great stuff happening this weekend, and I didn't get to watch all of every presentation, but I was dropping in, going, "Oof, I gotta step up my game here," because the conversations that have happened this weekend and the presentations that have gone on are just top notch. So. You guys have done a great job putting this all together. All
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. I'm gonna dip out and let you take it away here.
Mhm.
Yeah. Same.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
You good? Yeah, I'm sorry.
You need more?
You need more?
What support
I
do
just
you need
wanted
right
to
now?
banter a little bit, and
Oh,
just
sure.
gush about being part of a community. That's,
Oh yeah.
We just wanted to give you space. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate. I deeply appreciate everybody. I appreciate these two organizers here for putting this together and letting me help out with it. I appreciate all the folks out in the chat and on Twitter and everything, and all the speakers. This is one of those things where so much, like you said, just so much high level stuff. And I mean, even we after the Liminal Earth presentation on Friday night, even for the tech panel, we were like, we need to do a PowerPoint. Like they were.
We need 3
just-
slides.
Yeah.
I need. It's happening now, but I get that, and it's nice. It's nice that we all could be here together, considering what the circumstances outside are. Just people not being able to make it to all the cons. I see a lot of people, actually, I'm really happy. I saw a lot of folks that were just like, uh-oh. I might have to kiss a goblin again. I got a little...
Get the goblin.
Audio.
Make an offering.
Coming out right here. Here's our little guy.
Get a
Here's
biscuit
our
and
little
got
some
some
honey.
goblins over here. That's okay.
Okay.
It happens.
Okay. He has another
I
little
think it's
kiss.
working now.
Okay, good.
Yes.
See it work. That's chaos magic in action, baby.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actual and authentic.
Well, I don't know. I just got to say it's been. All right, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's a Kentucky goblin.
Oh,
too,
great.
So, yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Good stuff. Yeah, no, I just want to say it's pretty great. Just these past couple of years, I've just been on Twitter being a weirdo and kind of watching this community kind of coalesce, and just kind of a bunch of different people just from all corners, and they all kind of there seems to be a uniting spirit with it all, just like really good people that have good moral boundaries and ethical qualities to them, and rational minds, very bright people with senses of humor. And it just seems like this all came together in a great way for this con this weekend. So I'm really happy and proud to be a part of it, and humbled by it too. So
Well, thank you, and thank you for being
Thank you
a part
so
of
much. Yeah, absolutely.
it. And you're right, because like the way this coalesced, as quickly as it coalesced, the people who are willing to be involved with this, the people who volunteered, the people who agreed when we reached out to them, like I've been in awe all weekend of everybody who has spoken. Again, we found a great group of people who are compassionate and kind and open-minded and again, thoughtful and taking a pretty hard stand about like inclusiveness in the community and again, having diverse voices and opinions. And I don't know, my heart is just full of joy.
Yeah.
And for
so I'll
those
do my
that-
best here to.
No,
You're gonna be great. We all
You're gonna
know.
be great. You're gonna
Yeah.
be great.
Okay, so I guess I'll dive into it. I did
All
want to say
right.
that the flyer for this thing, it was also designed by Jason. Jason is an excellent graphic arts kind of wizard. You know, I'll go as far as to say wizard. So
Yes.
He's our tech mage, so
Yep.
yeah, he's also the graphics wizard.
yeah.
It's true.
I am most well known for that and my Tenny on a Penny meme masterpiece from some months previous. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Penny on a penny, you know.
Graphic wizardry. All right.
All right.
All right, sir. Take it.
Okay, here we go.
Here if you need us.
See.
so.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, sweet. So let me get my slideshow up and going, and we'll do the screen share here. Let's see. I don't know how to slideshow. There we go. Oh wait. I guess that's do the screen share first.
Let's do the screen
Bear
share
with
first,
me,
then do the
folks.
slideshow.
Yeah. Bear with me, folks. I'm not a tech mage myself. Okay. I'm sorry, where is the screen share button? See, this is what I was afraid of.
It
no.
Right on the bottom, on your
Yeah.
bottom zoom controls.
It
Okay.
should be green.
Green share button? That's
Yep.
it?
Yep.
Oh,
You got
okay.
it.
Desktop. Share. It's not letting me. I don't know what's going on here. Let's see. Oh boy. Cancel. Okay. I think I'm getting my screen now, right? You guys can see that?
Yep.
All right, good. Let's see. Okay. Huzzah! Okay, so there's the graphic I was talking about. Eye-popping UFOs and bug-eyed monsters, fact, fiction, and in between. So basically, this presentation, the genesis of it, just to give you a little background here, is there was an art gallery nearby where I live, and they were doing a like a UFO art kind of thing, and I had approached them about doing a presentation for them. It was kind of an odd deal because the guy was giving me a lot of liberty with what I could do with it, and I would have preferred to have a narrowed down idea of what he wanted me to present, but the whole thing ended up kind of falling through due to Delta and closure of the gallery itself. And so the reason I bring it up is because I had originally kind of designed this to be something that anyone could enjoy, even if they didn't have a background in UFOs the way many of the people watching probably do. So I didn't want to have to go into really deep cuts that I'd have to then explain. Now that I'm talking to a bunch of weirdos, though, I kind of updated it and changed it around a little bit. So this will include a whole lot of stuff that you've probably heard before, along with other things, and kind of the whole idea behind it is that it's more of a thought experiment, right? Because I'm talking about eye-popping UFOs and bug-eyed monsters. That was the snappy title I came up with, and probably the part I labored longest over in putting the idea together. But the central theme of it is where you have fact and fiction, and fact and truth are two very elusive things, right? You have you have UFO reports, and the reports may contain facts, but they may also be entirely fabrications, but they're not exactly fiction because they're posed as facts. Sometimes you have UFO reports that uh, match up pretty well with something from fiction, and then it becomes a chicken and the egg chase for a lot of UFO researchers to figure out, well, did this appear in fiction first, and then somebody saw it in fiction and then imagined that they saw it, or got the idea from that and decided to hoax something based on a sci-fi movie they saw, or something out of the Twilight Zone, or anything like that. And to me, none of those are really productive questions, because what we're dealing with is a sort of modern myth making and kind of an alchemical mixing of these two ideas, because fiction in and of itself is like a form of manifestation and magic, and it's bringing things into the world, and it's bringing things into the public consciousness. Language, the power of words, a lot of a lot of the ideas expressed, and maybe even unintended, we're going to get into some unintended uh, presentation, have led to something within the greater mindset that creates a reality, or a subset of reality, or reality tunnels for people. So when you get to the chicken and the egg, the way I've poetically tried to phrase it before is that occasionally you have an egg that didn't come from a chicken, it came from a rooster. And then in alchemy, what you end up with is, and like mythology, what you end up with is a chimera. So it's kind of a chimeric reality where the the origin of something is always going to be kind of unknown, or it's going to be so weird that the only things that can possibly be born from it are going to be weird beyond description. And the marriage of fact and fiction produces kind of a liminal in between state where you have facts, you have stuff that's made up, but there's an in between, and somewhere in that in between is the actual truth of the matter. So this is the thought experiment I'm working with. You can take or leave it. This is by no means comprehensive, because if it was, I would be here for 6 hours just reading a book that I wrote on the subject, uh, which I haven't written, and I would probably wouldn't even attempt to. So we're gonna jump into this, and hopefully I haven't already lost anybody with my meanderings here, and hopefully you can all see everything okay. Um, we're jumping right in. Again, since this was going to be a local presentation, I figured I'd start with something local. Massachusetts Bay Colony. So uh, often cited as kind of the earliest UFO sighting in the country was in 1639, is recorded by Governor Winthrop in his journals of the early days of the Bay Colonies. So the story is that you have a man on a rowboat with two other guys on the Muddy River, which, I don't know, I can't read this map great, but it would be somewhere down here, somewhere south of Boston. And I think it extends off the Charles River. So be around there. And they see this great white light. And it stood, it was moving across the sky, stands still, and flames up. And according to the report, from what Governor Winthrop described as a sober and judicious man, that's something we can return to in a bit. Flamed up, it was about 3 yards square, and when it shrank down, uh, it shrank down to either the size of a pig, or, as I have it quoted here, when it ran, it contracted into the figure of a swine and was swift as an arrow going across the night sky. The men that saw it found themselves upstream, like against the tide, and they had flown out and they had missing time. And it might be like the first instance of missing time in American history related to the UFO subject. What catches my eye here, though, is we talk about flying saucers, and people love to cite Kenneth Arnold describing the saucers as having flown like saucers skipping on the water. And other times he mentioned that it reminded him of the flight of like flying fish. But flying saucer is what stuck, and it had a lot to do with what the newspapers reported. And as another brief aside, I hadn't planned on really mentioning this before, but um, that's the power of language and the power of who's telling the story, right? Because flying saucer, largely the newspapers were the ones that coined that term and got it to take off. They took what Arnold said without the context of it so much, turned it into a thing. And what Arnold actually drew was more of a chevron shaped thing that looked, to me, it reminds me of like the Batarang from Batman comics. But people started seeing flying saucers with the actual UFO saucer shape that um, because of that use of language, because of that term that they used. So that got me thinking, if uh, if we have flying saucers because of the choice of words and the um, how the newspapers chose to phrase it, it would have been pretty funny if we had the same kind of attention given to it back then and we started calling them flying pigs. So it also gives me an excuse to use the flying pig from The Simpsons here as a slide. So so um, give me a second. I got something going on in the room. So yeah, so flying pig, swift as an arrow across the sky. Uh, as an addendum to that, will we ever really get to the bottom of what they are using the limits of language? And the answer to that is when pigs fly. So moving on, let's see, I have one that we can move on to. It requires like a certain kind of moving out of the language that we have and the descriptions that we have, because really, if we have a bright light moving across the sky as swift as an arrow, contracting into the figure of a swine, or being the size of a pig, it leaves plenty of room for any kind of skeptic or debunker. And I would, since we're on the subject of language right now, um, I would draw a line between those two things, because skepticism is a healthy attitude. It's a healthy way to approach really anything in life, not just the paranormal. But skepticism, or skeptics as a term, has lost all meaning in this field because people use it in a derogatory way for anybody that's just an out and out debunker, somebody that really just does not want the UFO subject to be taken seriously and will find any reason to shoot it down. So that is actually part of the case with this, because one of the explanations for this sighting is it would be ignis fatuus, or what we would know today as swamp gas. Um, Methane rising up out of the swamp, causing a luminous phenomena, and um, and that accounts for this bright light. I don't know that marsh gas or swamp gas would actually shoot across the sky like an arrow or cause people to lose 3 hours of worth of time, but you have a very old document using really archaic language, and the language and the way we look at reality and stepping out of the reality that we know to perceive something greater, um, you kind of end up in this weird gray area, right? So it's also funny too because the swamp gas, it's something that I personally like to joke about a lot on Twitter. Sometimes people get it and sometimes they don't. I really find it's funny when people want to jump down my throat about saying swamp gas when they clearly don't understand that I'm joking. But swamp gas was kind of like a pivotal thing in ufology. You know, it's like a running joke that's been around forever. And it was a kind of a pivotal moment for J. Allen Hynek during the Project Blue Book days, with the Michigan sightings that he tried to describe as swamp gas because he was kind of directed to come up with the reason to debunk it, right? So that was kind of a turning point for Hynek where he got a lot of flack for that, a lot of pushback, and it's almost a transformative thing, right? So after that, he wanted to really figure out what they are more than let the Air Force tell him to come up with any explanation other than aircraft from outer space or anything that doesn't have an earthly origin that we already understand and have documented. So the so you have this transformative swamp gas moment, and in between, because I think that was 1966, 67, in between 1639 and 1967, obviously you had a lot happen, and you had the Kenneth Arnold stuff that I had mentioned, but also in the late 1800s you had the mystery airships, which is another thing with fact and fiction that people like to point to, is that sometimes uh, the the things that people see and what they're imagining they're seeing, or I wasn't something that nobody had conceived of, but it wasn't something common either. And the ones that were reported being seen in the late 1800s had these weird stories around them, and people thought it was some crazy inventor that it was trying it out a lot of the time. But later, through a ufological lens, they are by definition, you know, unidentified flying objects. And we see this kind of shape prior to the flying saucer phenomena. You have what were sometimes called tubiform, tubular crafts, cigar shaped, and even right up until the present day, where you have the Tic Tac that is so entranced hashtag UFO Twitter for the last 4 or 5 years, however long it's been. It feels like 20 years. They love this little Tic Tac, and to me, it has precedence in the past. It's somewhere in between, kind of like a cigar shaped craft or an egg shaped craft. It's somewhere kind of in the middle of those two things. So you have these different shapes, and it doesn't take very much search online to find whole charts of all different kinds of crafts that have been described over the ages. Um, but it's worth mentioning that we have the saucers, we have the cigar shaped, and again, nowadays we're saying it's a tic tac because everybody knows what a tic tac is. A tic tac is a person is a perfectly acceptable socially thing to have anytime. It's a breath mint. It's a refresher, right? Um, so it's something that you would take in your mouth for an icebreaker moment where you're just meeting somebody to freshen your breath, right? Whereas a cigar would have been way more acceptable back in the 40s and 50s and 60s when people were reporting cigar shaped crafts. The choice of language is very much tied to the culture and what's acceptable and what's readily available at the time. You don't really see people smoking cigars out in public like you would have back then. So people probably wouldn't immediately go to cigar as a shape. It's kind of archaic already. I mean, people still smoke, obviously, but back then people were just chomping cigars on the bus or on the street corner or in a hospital. It didn't really matter. So it's all a matter of what you call it, and like I use this picture here because Carl Jung used it in his essays on flying saucers when he's talking about mandalas and the symbols behind what a flying saucer is. If you were to take a Freudian approach, though, sometimes a cigar-shaped craft is just a cigar-shaped craft, and as a corollary to that, to paraphrase Groucho Marx, I like Tic Tacs too, but I take them out of my mouth once in a while. Moving on to the next thing, flying saucers. My personal favorite flying saucer here, I really don't think it can be beat. It's the George Adamski saucer from 1952. I have the info right there under it. The Venusian flying saucer. It's one of the scout ships, not the mothership. Um, and I threw this in as well because what were the donuts? I do like this. This article here appeared in the same issue of Fate magazine that had the Kenneth Arnold flying saucer story in it. So that's kind of, we're neck and neck right now with the origins of flying saucers. Uh, what if people called them donuts? I would absolutely love that because I love donuts. Anybody that knows me knows I love donuts. I think it would be really funny if if instead of calling them flying saucers, we always just called them donuts. I imagine how different your choice of language would be in that instance. Because I mean, we also had frisbees that were called flying saucers, but you would probably just call it a frisbee using a brand name now instead of flying saucer, because flying saucer only means one thing. Um, this flying saucer here is, according to some accounts, Adamski had admitted that this up here is really just the top of a Coleman lantern, one of those old oil lanterns. And then he attached some ping pong balls underneath, which this, I think it says, um, it has portholes, spherical landing gear, and the lens relight on top of the cabin, and some kind of power coil, So using the imagination applied to mundane objects that Adamski put together to create what he wanted to claim was a flying saucer later. Um, that being said, we have what to most people's minds is an obvious fake here, but people have actually reported seeing saucers that look a lot like the Adamski saucer, drawing pictures that look almost exactly like that claim to have been unfamiliar with Adamski's material, um, and had not read his books or seen those photos before, which really is a real puzzler. If you're coming from the attitude that people are seeing things and then imagining that they see it in real life, if they're seeing something in a movie and then pretending they saw it in real, seeing something in real life and then it's really just a hallucination based on something that they already saw in a book or in a movie. If you had never seen an Adamski saucer, and they're pretty distinctive because a lot of flying saucers don't have this kind of ping pong ball thing going on, or the power coil, or the portholes. It's a very distinct looking saucer. If you really had never seen that before, but that's what you are drawing and saying you saw in the sky, then that raises some pretty weird questions, right? The implications of that are pretty out there. There is really no non-woo way to look at it. Um, so what were the donuts indeed? Um, we have a cosmic donut here. Uh, this is I think I just threw this in just for fun. Um, but even still, uh, you have the term flying saucer pretty quickly being replaced with the term UFO. So flying saucers becoming a bit passe, right? Um, because of association, honestly, with like the contactees and with people who uh, aren't deemed credible, people that have outrageous stories to tell or share photos like Adamski's there and stretch credulity for the masses. Um, you know, flying saucer sounds as funny as donut, really, at that point. So you have the term UFO, or as it was originally always pronounced, UFO, replacing flying saucer. Um, and really, that's kind of where we're still at today. Is people are all about UFOs. People are now just playing with the language again and saying UAP, um, which really is nothing new when you consider that the first two civilian organizations to look into flying saucers were NICAP and APRO, both having that AP in the name, uh, which is a great combination of letters, I might say so myself. The aerial phenomena has always been a descriptor that's a bit wider than just broader than just an object. So this umbrella covers things that could be plasma, that could be ball lightning or refractions of light or whatever the case may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be a solid object. So for anybody that really is thinking we're breaking new ground by widening this, it's just kind of always been that way. People have always used the term, and UFO or UFO, even though it is an acronym that just has an actual intended meaning originally and a meaning that you could pick apart a bit, is another one that's kind of fuzzy on what the meaning is now because it's been applied in so many different ways. Um, One thing that I mean, because really, if you want to be a stickler for it, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. A lot of people will say, "Okay, so in this movie, you had an alien come down in a UFO, and then he gets off the UFO and he grabs a guy and takes him back onto the UFO." And you're like, "Well, okay, this is a fictional setting, and you had an alien come down. Once it's landed, it's no longer flying. uh, since we know the guy's an alien based on the story, it's not unidentified. It's we can identify this as an alien craft, and on and on and on. So, being a stickler with the language isn't really necessarily helpful to anybody. You have to just kind of expect and anticipate that language is going to evolve and it's going to change, and the meanings are not going to be as rigid as some people would like them to be. And really, that's an uncomfortable position for a lot of people. um, it makes things difficult, and there's never really a memo that goes out to say, oh, hey, we've widened the interpretation for what this word might mean. you know this it's just, it becomes common usage, and the people dictate what the language becomes through their use of it. So that's why when we're looking at cases, and it doesn't even have to be that long ago, you can talk about cases from the 90s, and to me, that's not that long ago. I mean, there might be some people watching right now that weren't even born yet, which just makes me feel old. But language might have meant something different, or words that developed during that time even have changed since then. So what you get into is language plays a lot into it. The fiction plays a lot into it, and what people are actually reporting and encountering. But also, since I said I was going to get back to it, the credibility of the witnesses. So it seems an appropriate time to address that while we're all staring at this delicious donut and getting hungrier and hungrier. The the credibility. We had Winthrop earlier describing the man as sober and studious. We always want our witnesses to be doctors or politicians or armed forces, because, or police officers. These are acceptable for nuts and bolts researchers of UFOs to you know to as an example of somebody that is not going to be telling you a lie, somebody that is not going to hallucinate what they saw, somebody that's not going to be making up a wild story just for attention. And I mean, that becomes very problematic for a wide number of reasons, because you have to be a little bit flexible when you're talking about witnesses and what you consider credible or incredible, or things that you want to believe or don't believe. So yeah, you need to be a little bit careful with how you approach that. I'm going to pause right here for a moment. I don't know if anybody has any commentary, but I have to go check my router because I'm having a little internet difficulty. I will be right back in a minute.
This is what happens when you speak about the forbidden topics. You get a little router difficulty, and then I'm over here kissing goblins to try to make it better. This is definitely, if you have donuts available, this is your smoke them if you got them moment, but for donuts.
Smoke them if you got them.
Okay, my apologies to everybody on the stream. I think I had a little bit of a technical goblin issue there, but I think it's rectified now. We're reaching a point where I'm about to, let's see, move on to a little bit of a different arena here. So this is kind of ends up being in 3 different parts. I didn't know if anybody from the YouTube comments currently had any questions on or commentary on what happened so far before we move on to the next thing. So I'll hold for a second, just see if anybody wanted to jump in with a question or anything like that, because I've been going kind of rapid fire here, and I'm going to move into a whole different direction. So if I don't hear anything,
you've got a lot of just positive commentary here. Some expressions of concern that the goblins or euphonauts had gotten you.
Oh no! Was my audio cutting out?
No, you were they were interfering with your router. So.
Oh right. Well, I think that might have a terrestrial explanation, because when my cat destroyed my Twilight Zone bobblehead the other day, she also knocked over the router. So I don't know.
Oh gosh!
But I was getting messages on my computer that it was internet connection unstable, and I had to just go run and check it, because I wasn't sure if my audio was getting chewed up or not. So
I think you're safe to proceed for now.
Okay, and nobody has any questions or anything.
I'm not seeing him yet. Everybody,
okay, cool.
Every time you ask for questions, they always come like a few seconds later. So we'll save them for the second half of the lecture here. We'll get them all at the end.
All right. Yeah, we'll just do it all at the end. That works for me too. So, all right. Sorry, people. this actually is my first real slideshow presentation, so I hope everybody's enjoying it so far, and we'll proceed with the good stuff, flying saucers. So, flying saucers over Washington, D.C. This right here is from Earth versus the Flying Saucers. It's a movie from 1956, and it's has one of my favorite like big screen flying saucers in it, and that were developed by Ray Harryhausen. If anybody doesn't know who Ray Harryhausen was, he was um, he was an animator basically. He did stop motion animation for movies. I think one of the first ones he ever worked on was the original King Kong, but a lot of people remember him most. One of my favorites is like Jason and the Argonauts and the Greek epics that he worked on in the 60s and 70s with the stop motion skeletons and stuff. And the reason I include it here is because this is really only a couple years after we had actual flying saucer reports over Washington D.C. And the movie kind of culminates with a flying saucer battle at the nation's capital. There's a famous, or maybe you'd recognize a GIF of the rotating flying saucer crashing into the Capitol building. Um, and then over here we have a cartoonist's depiction of a bunch of saucers going right over the Capitol building. So it's just kind of a neat juxtaposition of a movie about flying saucers attacking Earth, and it's a little bit on the goofy 50s sci-fi side. I wouldn't qualify it necessarily as a B movie because it's still pretty good. It's good as far as movies go. It's not really cheesy, but the Harryhausen flying saucers are certainly worth looking at. Even if you just had it on the background and just watched them flying around on the screen, it's really beautiful stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny for me to think that uh, this whole flying saucers over Washington, it's not like it's not known about. It's not like nobody talks about it, but it doesn't seem to be like a big deal, you know. Uh, it blows my mind because you would think it would be a huge deal, something that people would still talk about now. Um, but within 4 years of that happening, we have a sci-fi epic with Ray Harryhausen's flying saucers destroying the Capitol right after. So we have this take of the saucers over our nation's capital as a threat, right? Which that's a continuous theme, and you have multiple uh, multiple ways of looking at it. You have the contactees and their peaceful contact with the Space Brothers, and you've always had the nuts and boltsy kind of UFOs are a threat to national security kind of angle to it, and then a whole spectrum of things in between. So uh, the bulk of this part is I threw this in because I thought it was funny. Looking for true stories online. It was actually part of a book title that um, this actually should have been before that last slide. Sorry about that. Well, anyway, this gets to what I was talking about with truth versus fiction. It's a little disappointing to me that anybody would type into a search engine, are there any true stories that are totally true? Um, as a Discordian, I would say everything is true, even false things. But that might be an unintentionally profound question because it sounds like a very silly question. But every true story has elements to it that's a bit of fabrication or exaggeration, right? And every false story has some kind of glimmer of truth. Um, you can have facts and you can have stories without them containing truth per se, but there is some truth somewhere, right? And this one just kind of cracked me up. Are there any survival stories in real life? And I would have to say no, nobody ever actually survives life. So we're gonna move past that one because it's out of order. The day the Earth stood still. That's where I wanted to go. So the day the Earth stood still is where I decided to go with this story, and hadn't realized it before, but this is actually like a big anniversary year for this movie. Um, I would consider that to be kind of a synchronicity in and of itself that I decided to focus kind of on this movie, and then a couple of weeks ago realized, oh wow, it's actually the 70th anniversary of this movie coming out. So yeah, 1951, the day the Earth stood still. Um, so the this movie really touches on some of the contactee stuff, and especially with your perfectly human looking alien Klaatu over here and a humanoid robot Gort. Um, I promised bug-eyed monsters, but I do have to get out of the way the fact that a lot of aliens that were witnessed back then, or purported aliens, Venusians, space brothers of all stripes, were depicted really just as looking like people. They look just like you and I. Um, Usually better looking people, but like on the more attractive side of people, but people nonetheless. So this movie tells the story of Klaatu and Gort coming to Earth, and they have a message for mankind, and the message, uh, to keep it brief, or to sum it up, is that Earth needs to clean up its act because we're too warlike, and they've enlisted enforcers throughout the galaxy like Gort that will that will destroy civilizations that aren't following the rules and being peaceful. So so right here you have the alien intervention and the idea of peace from the stars and warnings from the stars. And in my research with a post I did a little while back, which I didn't manage to shoehorn into this at all, about Bugs Bunny and UFOs, George Hunt Williamson, the same contactee that had heard from space people about the Bugs Bunny cartoons, had also heard about this movie and was told that the events and ideas depicted in The Day the Earth Stood Still are closer to reality than he could possibly imagine. Right. So, right off the bat, you already have a connection to this movie to somebody that claims to be in contact for real with aliens. Um, and again, like I said, we have a whole credibility thing here where George Hunt Williamson, in addition to being um, among the contactees, getting messages about sci-fi movies and Bugs Bunny cartoons, is also a very problematical figure in the respect that he was associated with basically fascist groups, you know, the silver shirts and whatnot, that uh, prior to his delving into UFOs. And I think he kind of distanced himself from the there was kind of a divide between producers and writers and whatnot about playing up like a Christian allegory in the story, and making Klaatu a Christ-like figure. They managed to kind of subtly shoehorn in a Christ-like allegory by him assuming the identity of a man named Carpenter. So Carpenter being like, you know, Christ was a carpenter in life. Um, and Klaatu ultimately ends up sacrificing himself for the benefit of the world, much like, you know, Christ sacrificed himself for our sins, or God sacrificed Christ for our sins, depending on how you look at it. Um, and that's something we see crop up again later too, where especially with things like the Ashtar channelings and uh, Ashtar, Sharon, and the Galactic Federation, and all these other ideas, is that Christ was actually an alien. Christ was is an ascended master brother from outer space, and it has precedent before that too, where they talk about in theosophy. So now we have like a mix up of occult and religious themes mashed up in sci-fi, along with alleged true contactees and people that are talking to beings from outer space. But it doesn't stop there, because next we have whoop, yep, all right. Next we move on to Albert Bender, and this is connected in a way that is going to take me a minute to get to. Why am I going so far ahead? Bender, of course, especially the people that came into this or are big fans of Hellier, know that the Bender was kind of the guy that started the whole Men in Black mythos and really got it moving. Like his book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and this is his depiction of a man in black here. Um, uh, the he has also started the International Flying Saucer Bureau and had a newsletter, and it's kind of like one of the really early guys getting into connecting with other people interested in flying saucers around the world in the early 1950s. Um, and Bender's an interesting character, and the reason he gets brought up here is that we have World Contact Day is something that was attributed to Bender. It was March 15th, 1953. Um, he his idea was that people could telepathically send out this message to contact the Space Brothers, um, and reach out to them that way. And I think that's actually the event that precipitated the presence of the Men in Black in his life, is after he did that. But uh, I have it right here. And tell me if any of this sounds familiar to you, because this is the message you were supposed to memorize and telepathically send out. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends, and would like you to make an appearance here on Earth. Your presence before us will be welcomed with the utmost friendship. We will do all in our power to promote mutual understanding between your people and the people of Earth. Please come in peace and help us in our earthly problems. Give us some sign that you have received our message. Be responsible for creating a miracle here on our planet to wake up the ignorant ones to reality. Let us hear from you. We are your friends. Um, so you may have put together, if you heard the song before, the song Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, made popular by the Carpenters after originally being released by a band named Klaatu, which Klaatu, let's see where have we heard that name before. So we got Klaatu again in connection with Bender's telepathic message to the aliens, Klaatu being invoked as a band name for a band that writes a song based on a telepathic message that Albert Bender sends out, along with putting it in his newsletter for other people to kind of charge this message to people from outer space. Gets resurrected years afterward. This is 1953, only 2 years after this movie comes out, and after Bender doing that is when he meets the Men in Black. I included the Flatwoods Monster here in case anybody was wondering what the hell he's doing here. It's kind of appropriate because one reason I always love this picture is because you have this guy, and this guy seems to be saying, "Who put that monster here? What's that thing doing here? What? Anybody want to come get this monster? It's in my way. I think it's funny. But Albert Bender did say at one point, and it has been described, that the men in black can assume this human form or human-ish form, or they can take over a human body. So they seem to be kind of like formless, but can just jump into a body, which ultimately kills the person whose body they took over. But their true form, or a form they can take, is very close to the Flatwoods monster image. I also wanted to include it because he is kind of a bug-eyed monster, and not too different from, I think it was called It Conquered the Earth. It was a giant kind of crab-like monster that looked like a teepee with teeth, like a big cone-shaped thing. It's a pretty bad movie, but it does kind of show you how some of these shapes and ideas and archetypes and images can kind of transcend the reality and the fiction, or maybe occupy an imaginal realm where they're never technically physical reality as we understand it, but do have some form of reality in living in our heads rent free and living in our nightmares. So moving forward, a lot of people have cited Albert K. Bender's Chamber of Horrors, his famous quote unquote room here. Um, I think Nick Redfern in particular talks about the fact that Bender may have been like schizophrenic, and he could have imagined a lot of what he saw. And to be really fair, a lot of Bender's, even his Men in Black encounters, he described as having happened in while he was in a trance-like state or while he was asleep. So it could have been dreams and stuff. But when you look at a guy who keeps a room like this, especially if he's sleeping in there, like, what kind of freak lives that way? Oh, this is my living room. I mean, you need some lights. So I guess my living room isn't very different from Albert K. Bender's Chamber of Horrors. But the point remains that people tend to think that you had a guy that was filling his head with horrific imagery all the time, certain kind of like occultic things, uh, may have even been dabbling in the occult or something like that. But other than like the space imagery here with the moon, planets, and stuff, there isn't anything to indicate flying saucers necessarily. But Bender was like a huge horror fan, so he's and if he did have a wavering sense of belonging in the consensus reality, perhaps he could conjure up something in his subconscious mind that he believed was a real thing. And I think from what I read, Alan Greenfield has noted the presence in the picture of, I'm not sure what he was referring to specifically. It might have been this one down here, of something with like actual occult significance that Bender might not have known of, right? So he might have accidentally dabbled in the occult by having basically a shrine, right? So you got all these black cats and the wolfman and skeletons and skulls. Um, and it, calling forth something dark and ancient by including something there, which if I were an alarmist type, I might use that as a moment to say caution, a little cautionary tale to anybody that likes to dress up their house in a macabre way, that one of those decorations might just get you in trouble because it might actually be haunted or something, right? But I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not an alarmist, and I don't think there's demons everywhere. So if uh, if it is a concern of yours, just learn about warding yourself and protecting yourself in an occultic sense. I'm probably not the best guy to ask about it, and there's plenty of other people you could. So that's beyond the scope of this here presentation. But it is interesting to think about, right? So just having yourself surrounded by these kinds of images, um, living in that space, as it were, and conjuring up either something dark and old and occultish, or just your fascination with pop culture making you more suggestible. And again, we're back to credibility. Was Bender a schizophrenic or was he not? We always want somebody with a sober, uh, mentally stable state of mind. We don't need a schizophrenic. We don't need a weirdo that lives inside a chamber of horrors telling us stories. Um, I mean, I need that. I'm sure a lot of people here enjoy that, but that seems to be the attitude of the people that want UFOs taken seriously. Which, if we refer back to the donut slide that we spend a lot of time on, is clearly not a huge. I would say the same kind of psychological response that one would get from looking at a skull with like the darkened eyes and the sallow features and stuff like that. So it's almost as though uh, like the gray alien, the typical gray face, has almost like a skull-like um, reminder of death, like a memento mori that is unsettling to people aspect to it. And as a final note for Bender and the Men in Black here, because I do need to get back to Klaatu, is it's also been noted in 1950 there was a movie released in the UK called The Man in Black, and I think again it was Nick Redfern that suggested that possibly that's what inspired Bender to uh, to invent in his own mind or hallucinate or for whatever reason experience the Men in Black that he met in his room. So moving forward, back to Klaatu. So this is this is a little cross stitch that my lovely wife actually made me like years ago when we were first dating. So based on the song itself. So that's one of the refrains in the chorus. It goes, "We are your friends." Um, this is the cover of the Klaatu album. So that Calling Occupants appeared on. Um, it's the album itself was called. Oh wait, sorry, I have it in my notes. They named themselves. They named the band after the character from that movie, um, and the album was called 3:47 Eastern Standard Time. Uh, and that's the time that the saucer crashed in the movie, or the saucer came to Earth in the movie, the day that the Earth stood still, 3:47 Eastern Standard Time, prominently featured there. And then so you had the Klaatu being invoked here with the album. The funny thing about this album coming out is that Klaatu was a Canadian progressive band that people didn't really know who they were when they first came out. And when this album came out and that song particularly started hitting the airwaves, there was a lot of controversy over who the band was, and people liked the song, but other people were mystified by it. And some other people started a rumor that it was actually a project that the Beatles put together. So this is 1976 now. The Beatles have been broken up for 7 years. So I think they had a couple different ideas for why that would be the case. If you listen to the Klaatu song, I'm not really sure why you would hear the Beatles there, but that's what people were hearing. Um, and as this rabbit hole is winding itself around, we take a look at the Beatles. Here's John Lennon in the 60s, the first time he went to New York with a UFO detector that he bought in New York. Um, I've read varying accounts that Lennon was really into UFOs, flying saucers, had lots of stories, may have had experiences when he was younger. And in the mid 70s actually saw a UFO in New York during what people refer to as his lost weekend, where he was away. He was separated from Yoko Ono and living in New York. He, from his penthouse apartment, was apparently so close to one that he could throw a rock at it. He could have thrown a rock at it, he said. And he did call the police and tell them, but I don't really think they did much in that way. And again, back to credibility again. Lennon said that he was very much sober when he saw it. So it's not too beyond the pale to think that, I guess, Lennon would have written a song about calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Also, in the early 70s, you had Ringo releasing an album where he himself is clad too, coming off of a flying saucer with Gort in front of him. The album Goodnight Vienna, which I guess he got that from John Lennon as a way, or I think the song that the title comes from was written by John Lennon, but the phrase "Goodnight Vienna" was something they would say in their Liverpudlian, as a way of just saying like, well, it's all over, that's the end of that. And so it was kind of a colloquialism on their part. But I guess these kinds of factors here were things that led people to believe that at least John and Ringo had gotten back together to record, and the Beatles were secretly back together but performing as Klaatu, which is a strange turn of events, and even stranger when you consider Lennon's sighting / possible sightings, because there are others who think he may have seen things when he was younger, and his interest in general, and Ringo's odd choice for an album cover here. This all gets back to, I was kind of surprised to find a lot of people didn't really know about this, but because I referenced it a few times and people were like, say what? But the origin story for the Beatles that John Lennon kind of came up with, when people would ask him, where did you come up with the band name? Now, what I've always understood to be the actual truth here, and here we go again, we're talking about truth versus fiction, as really for something as in the grand scheme trivial as where a band got their name from, that they were influenced by Buddy Holly and the Crickets. So instead of the Crickets, they became the Beatles, and then they changed that one letter just because like a beat in music versus like BEE for Beatle. But Lennon had this story where a man on a flaming pie came to him and said, let there be Beatles with an A, right? So I have that. I found out when looking into it that we got this image created by an artist named Letty Blackburn. I thought it was really cool, and it does seem to kind of like invoke this whole flying saucer and like a man coming off of a flying saucer, because really what's the difference between a flying saucer and a flaming pie? If you were to invert this and the flames were on the bottom and the man was still on the top, or the man was just to the side of it, you would have something not too different from Klaatu stepping off of a flying saucer, right? So so let's see, it's right here. So we will tell you where it came from. It came in a vision. A man appeared on a flaming pie and said unto them, from this day on you are Beatles with an A. Thank you, Mr. Man, they said, thanking him. So clearly, like, John Lennon has like a sense of humor here, and clearly kind of joking, right? And people have actually repeated the story of let there be Beatles with an A, or from henceforth you are Beatles with an A. To John, it happened in John Lennon's dream, but everywhere I've looked for the actual quotes, he always says it came in a vision. And it's funny because this seems to be the earliest account of Lennon asking the question, and it's from 1961. So well before they were a worldwide phenomenon, before Ringo was even in the band, he had this like mythos for the band. And I think it was just a joke. It was just Lennon being a smartass. But I always kind of thought it was, Lennon getting frustrated with being asked the question so many times. Either way, like I said, image wise and speaking in terms of visual rhyming and archetypes, shapes, um, things that sink into our subconscious in a certain way, uh, for someone very much into flying saucers and the stories around them, a flaming pie and a man with a message, especially even amplified by the idea that it was in a vision, um, is really pretty intriguing through a ufological lens, especially when you're talking about somebody that later actually reported seeing a UFO and incorporated that into a song lyric for, I think, Nobody Told Me. Yeah, the song Nobody Told Me, he says, um, there's UFOs over New York and I ain't too surprised. So, so that's kind of a, a fun little back and forth. This is what I was talking about at the top of this, is the way that, um, the truth, if you think of the truth as a golden thread, is just transient. It's just passing its way through moments. It's going from one era to another, appearing in one place as a vision to a man, appearing in another place as an actual physical flying saucer that leaves physical evidence, and to another as an inspiration for a song lyric, or perhaps an image that they create, or just a great story that they can write down and have published in Amazing Stories magazine that will later get turned into a movie that will, along with a telepathic message to Space Brothers, become a song in 1976, invoking the biggest band of all time, which had already been broken up for 7 years, and leads us back to the man on the flaming pie. Um, it's I mean, there's a thread tying all of this together, and does it mean anything at all? Am I just like wasting everybody's time right now? I don't think I am, because this is the kind of thing I want to do, is to try to, um, because I mean, any of these little factoids in isolation, um, really aren't that interesting to people, and it blows my mind. I'm like, it's like people thought Klaatu was actually the Beatles, but it wasn't. And John Lennon actually saw a flying saucer, and people will say, so it takes me slides and going through this and yammering on for 20 minutes to really explain how all these little things connect in different ways by an invisible strand that, most people wouldn't really even try to put together. And even if they did, they would say, well, what's the point? What is the point? And the truth is the point, right? The truth. That's what we're getting at, is the truth. And really, whether or not the truth matters in a phenomenological sense, that we can all share it in consensus reality. Because the truth perhaps isn't meant to be shared by all of us for one single idea. A man on a flaming pie coming to any one of us might have meant an entirely different thing than it did to John Lennon, right? It's a very personalized thing. My whole thought experiment here is really to just, get people pulling on the strings. When you find those loose strands, go ahead and pull on them. When you find rabbit holes, dig around in them a little bit, because these connections, whether or not we're talking causality, whether or not the things are supposed to have affected each other or inspired each other directly, because most of the time this is all just glancing. It's peripheral. It's tangential. It's not direct cause and effect. It's we're hopping back and forth in time. Uh, we went from 1951 to 53 to 67 to 61 to 76. We're all over the place right now. So, 77, the Carpenters actually cover that. And as a final one, I was dismayed to realize I didn't include the slide, but there's a reference to it in Army of Darkness, the movie where Ash is supposed to remove the Necronomicon from the graveyard, and he has to say the magic words first, the sacred words Klaatu Barata Nikto, which that's the code from the day the Earth stood still. Um, that was supposed to that was how you gained command over Gort, so he wouldn't destroy the entire planet. Um, it's a funny little reference, and to some people, it's a nerdy little Easter egg. Uh, and I always felt like it was a little joke put there just for me and all the other people that are, big nerds into sci-fi. um, uh, and it's worth mentioning here because that is there you go again with the occult aspect, the concept of the Necronomicon, which never existed prior to the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. Necronomicon, as it exists in the Evil Dead trilogy, is its own thing, really. But the idea that these same code words uh, that Klaatu uses to control his uh, his monolithic robot enforcer are the same words that you would use in an occult setting in order to safely remove the Necronomicon Ex Mortis from its mantle in the graveyard and not accidentally raise an army of the dead, many of which I'd like to mention at the moment, resemble the army of the dead born from the Hydra's teeth in Jason in the Argonauts, to get back to Ray Harryhausen. See how it's all connected in weird ways. So the uh, the occult influence, again, we're back to like Albert Bender, maybe possibly accidentally summoning forth an entity, or dabbling in the occult himself, or George Hunt Williamson and his like theosophical bent towards fascism kind of roots that he came out of before he was contacting aliens, or the Christ-like allegory and the lens applied over Klaatu, and later channelers like Tuella, um, the people that would channel Ashtar and talked about the end of days and having to evacuate Earth, applying the same kind of Christ-like thing to Ashtar. Um, it's this whole theological, occult, and flying saucer uh, um, ball of wonder, ball of weirdness that gets amplified and echoed through our fiction and through our art and our and music, and appears in the strangest, oddest, most absurd, and comedic places. For anyone who hasn't seen Army of Darkness, I mean, it's a funny movie. It's not horror in the sense that maybe the first two movies were, but there's pure slapstick going on in that movie, and um, comedy makes great fodder for breaking through the barriers. And I've noticed this in my own life. I've said before, hilarious magic is the best magic, because comedy can upset the subroutines in your mind the same way like any other kind of altered state would, right? Um, don't know how many people would agree with that statement, but there are sometimes things that you would say as a joke, like a man came to me in a vision on a flaming pie, um, that might actually be some kind of, in some way, weirdly profound and tangential to other things. So, in that respect, right here, we have a Three Stooges short. This is, unfortunately, it's a Joe Besser one. Um, I think I'll reserve my rant about the Three Stooges and the different Third Stooge um, iterations that they did. But basically, you had Curly first, and well, you had Shemp first in their stage days, and then you had Curly, and then you had Shemp. And then Shemp died, and because he was friends with Joe Besser, was replaced by Joe Besser. And Joe wasn't very funny. But this short was pretty great, because Joe Besser is a witness, right? So he has witnessed a UFO. Um, I think in the beginning of it, he actually takes a picture of an actual pan that gets thrown at him, and he has a flying saucer photo. But then he actually meets UFOnauts, and in we got our kind of like sexy lady UFOnauts here, which is totally a thing in a lot of movies. This is a Mexican movie called Ship of Monsters, um, that we're getting more towards the bug-eyed monsters now, but it's another example of a trope of like beautiful humanoids, and especially like the the kind of like you know sexy lady euphanaut phenomena, which actually, once again, contactees did actually kind of report this stuff. If you think about like Howard Menger, Truman Bethram, um, the Antonio Villas Boas case, where he's taken on board a craft and actually engages in sex with a female entity on board as part of a human alien hybrid sort of situation. Um, I mean, this is all patently ridiculous stuff, right? Or is it? You know, so it's really kind of funny when you using Joe Besser of the Three Stooges at the time, and Mexican sci-fi to make a point. But I mean, it's not beyond the pale for ufology of the time. Um, to that point too, going back to Earth versus the flying saucers, this is the aliens from the movie. When we finally do meet them, they're a lot like Klaatu, and they're a lot like our saucer ladies from the previous slide. Uh, the reason for that is that they ran out of money. So this is kind of what I was getting at earlier, as examples of things that happen through happenstance and maybe even weren't really intended. It would have been phenomenal to see these aliens in this movie, animated by Ray Harryhausen, like worm men, the worm men aliens. Um, Super cool looking, but because a lot of their budget was spent on the amazing flying saucer animation that they did, and among other things, they didn't really have the time or the funds to make these aliens, and the aliens you ended up with were the more boring humanoid type. Which brings us to the more modern gray. As I had said before, like really looking at a gray alien face, you have the dark eyes, right? The not very pronounced nose, the gaunt kind of shape to it, which I think is unsettling to a lot of people, partly just because it is that kind of memento mori effect. The idea that it's almost like staring into a skull, something a little bit spooky. It reminds us of death. Um, Over here we have, oh no, okay. Over here we have a still from the X Files episode Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which has a send up of the image on the left, which is from, of course, the cover of Communion by Whitley Strieber. So a lot of people kind of will cite this as a landmark moment for imagery within UFOs. Gone are the humanoids and the monsters and the really crazy looking things, because now we're into the late 80s and Whitley Strieber's Communion is out with this depiction, which isn't even really what he describes in the book. Strieber has often been quoted saying like it didn't exactly look like that, but this image has had an effect and it's resounded with a lot of people. A lot of people that claim to have had abduction experiences will talk about not even being able to really look at the book cover because it takes them right back there, right? And you have it here lampooned a bit in the picture where he's now smoking a cigarette, because that's part of the story there. Um, and this episode of the X Files, for anyone who hasn't watched it, is outstanding, with a million little Easter eggs for anybody into UFOs, and contains probably the best depictions of high strangeness encounters with men in black that have ever been depicted anywhere. Um, and kind of plays with that idea of um, what aliens look like, because you have aliens that are actually Air Force guys in costumes that are met with a gigantic monster that looks like a Ray Harryhausen animation. Back to Harryhausen again, um, named Lord Kimboat, and it's just it's a really nutty episode in a lot of ways, but but it's so beyond absurd. It actually mirrors the kind of stuff that you're encountered with when you're dealing with high strangeness cases, and you actually have characters in the show in that episode named. I think there's one named Valet and another one named Hynek, um, and it's also interesting to note that here we have we got kind of a full circle thing going on. Oh, the title of this book, since I mentioned Howard Menger, Outer Space, is a reference to Howard Menger's book, um, From Outer Space to You. Um, so yeah, so we had UFOs visiting Washington in the 50s. You know, actual reports with radar returns and people seeing them, and then movies about it. Saucers going to Washington, the idea about aliens landing on the White House lawn, aliens seeking audience with the president and other world leaders. And then, all, like when you start getting into the conspiracy mind of the 80s and 90s, and the gray alien ideas, now you have Washington, D.C. seeking them out in the form of Mulder and Scully as FBI agents investigating it. So it's kind of a weird full circle thing, right? You have the government actually being more proactively looking for these things. But we're here to talk about bug eyes and monsters. So moving on, this is from 1919. Um, it's a long lost film called First Men in the Moon, an adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel of the same name, which came out 18 years before that. Really interesting, like unsettling moon men here, but um, it's kind of cool to think that at that time you had this idea of aliens with enlarged heads, the really big craniums, the dark sunken eyes, the lack of other features and stuff like that. And from what I understand, uh, don't know what the earliest instances of this are, but the concept back then in pulp fiction, or before pulp, the pulp era really, but in Penny Dreadfuls or anything and talking about men from other worlds is that the head was enlarged so much because it played with the ideas that were still relatively new and gaining acceptance of like Darwinian evolution, that we've only got where we are through the expansion of our minds and our brains. Specifically, our brains got bigger, so we became more intelligent, learned how to use tools and build things and have a civilization. And the idea back then is that any sufficiently advanced civilization that's well beyond us would have to have even bigger heads because they would need bigger brains, right? So that's kind of a cool idea and a weird way to look at it. But this is kind of the brainiac leader of the Moon Men here. Um, Not exactly looking like a gray alien, but kind of you can see the um, resemblance a little bit at least. And a lot of people would also point to getting back to the occult strand that I was pulling on before. As ridiculous as the Army of Darkness Necronomicon reference was, Aleister Crowley, just 2 years before this movie came out, had done his Elementra working. I think I'm getting that right, but that was where he got in contact with a being called Lam, Lam, and I don't have a slide for that, but I think uh, a lot of people know would recognize it if they saw it, because it really does kind of look like a gray alien, but with sort of more human features. Um, just 2 years before this movie was made, so you have kind of like these two examples of proto gray aliens way before gray aliens were center stage. So uh, more examples of big-headed, bug-eyed monsters. Invasion of the Saucermen. I really love these guys. They're pretty great, but you have more of a antagonistic and monstrous, like demonish kind of devilish, little impish guys here with this one. Um, it says two hideous, bug-eyed. Uh, well, it says midgets from Invasion of the Saucermen. Don't think we'd really use that term now. It's considered insensitive to little people. So over here we have another alien. Uh, Anybody that was a fan of Star Trek in the original series would remember that guy, because that was a big impression on me. Is this one alien, it appears in the end credits of every episode, and it seems like he's there inordinately longer than the other aliens that are in this little slideshow at the end credits. And as a kid watching the original series, I always felt like this guy was just staring into my soul while I was waiting for the next episode to start. Um, so it's a variety of big-headed aliens. Invasion of the Saucermen was a 1950s movie again, and then of course the original series of Star Trek was in the 60s, and you get to kind of see this evolution over time, getting back to the evolutionary development idea. Here's a cartoon that I included because it's really funny to think, amazing, they got every detail exactly wrong. So if these are all just projections of our subconscious and just reiterations and recontextualizations of the same ideas over and over again, the bulbous heads that remind us of our mortality with their skull-like features, and the big heads that represent big brains and something bigger than us and smarter than us, something more advanced than us and perhaps more emotionally detached from us. Like, there's so much baggage that's carried with the gray alien appearance, and it may not even be what they are. They could be one-eyed, dumpy, big-eared, antennaed aliens that it look like, I don't know, like little goofy elephant guys here with many, many fingers. And to them, it's just really funny that this is what we came up with. This is the alien shape that we agree with. Now, I haven't even really addressed the fact that we're talking about aliens from outer space, uh, and I sort of presumes the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the dominant force underlying all of this. That is not what I believe. So I don't really think that the shape is all that important. I don't think it's central to it. I don't think it's a blood and flesh and physical reality sort of thing. I'm not a nuts and bolts guy. Um, anyway, most of the flying saucer reports I've heard, they're seamless and don't have any visible nuts or bolts on them. So it's just really funny to think that things aren't only like weirder than we think they are; they're also weirder than we're capable of thinking they are. Things are dimensions weirder than we think they are, because they're outside the bounds of what we could even possibly understand. It's not a particularly helpful answer to anybody, and people are really uncomfortable with uncertainty. And I think that discomfort and the unknown aspect of it, and the idea that even if you did have the explanation, you wouldn't understand it, is leaves you hanging on the end of uncertainty. That's not a comfortable place for people, and it might well be a huge part of why we envision aliens looking like this, and coloring them green as well, even though that's never anything that's really been reported. It's just a hangover from the little green men. So speaking of which, since we had goblins interfering earlier, uh, I'm glad that I thought to include the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins here too. Um, Another one that had a big impact on me when I was younger. Like, this picture, I remember seeing as a kid, and just like that really stuck with me. It was always something that kind of haunted my mind. Um, but from the very first reporting of it, this is an illustration that was drawn by a cartoonist named Larry Hill. He was saddled with the job of drawing the little man, or one of the little men that were attacking the Sutton farm, um, and reported by Billy Ray Taylor and Bud Ledworth. Um, and you got to think like a cartoonist on payroll for the Evanston, Illinois Courier. Usually the dude's drawing cartoons related to sports games. He's like a sports columnist and cartoonist, and he's just drawing little cartoons for the paper. And now he's got to take a UFO report and draw what it is that people saw, their encounter with humanoid or impish beings from beyond the stars. And it's great that what he comes up with is more like folkloric looking. It looks more elvish. It looks like a little leprechaun type of guy, and uh, it kind of goes to show that, again, the language that's used, the reporting of it, the way the story changes over time or evolves through retelling is so dependent on who's doing the storytelling and who gets the message out there. And again, uh, we're back to the whole credibility idea with the people, involved, the family involved with the Hopkinsville case, were kind of considered backwater hicks or made to look that way. The implication was that alcohol was involved. Um, uh, they were partying it up and got drunk and saw a bunch of imps. And I mean, most of these things aren't true. Um, Two of the witnesses were carnival workers, so that was used against them. They're just carnies. You can't trust what they say. Um, it's that credibility gap. It's a credibility problem, really. And really what it is it's a form of elitism and classism, and it runs across races and genders, but doesn't disclude them. In fact, in cases where women are reporting things, or other non-white people, or people of other persuasions, but they wouldn't even want to talk about it, right? Because here you have people discounted for the job they have. Like maybe Carney was the only work available, and uh, who's to judge a Carney, really? Because of where they lived. And I think people that knew them wouldn't have assumed anything about them. But if you're in another state reading about a couple of people on a farm in West Virginia or Kentucky or whatever, and you have this whole idea of you might have a different idea of what their life is like and who the people are that are reporting it. And if the newspaper or somebody that looks into it wants to say that they were drunk hillbillies, then you're less inclined to believe the story. And I mean, if your drawing and depiction is a cartoonish little leprechaun guy, that's not a whole lot to go on. But there's a reason this story has endured, and that might well be because there's some glimmer of truth to it, right? That thread of truth is running through it somewhere. And people have stuck with it enough to defend. I mean, many of the family members, at least the grandchildren that were in the house at the time, are still alive to tell the story about the Hopkinsville goblins. Um, so it just kind of reinforces a lot of the ideas that I've already talked about so far in this presentation. So kind of reaching the end now. We have more cartoony descriptions. Like I said, I didn't really get to shoehorn the Bugs Bunny stuff in, but you had Marvin the Martian, of course, from cartoons, and Marvin abducting Bugs Bunny before Betty and Barney Hill were ever abducted. But now you have like popular interpretations. I think it's interesting given the fact that as we moved towards gray aliens as the standard for aliens in the 90s, you also had cartoons like The Simpsons or The Far Side taking more whimsical, crazy approaches to aliens and still still keeping that flying saucer mentality. It was still like almost a nostalgia throwback back then, and it might have been kind of like the last gasps of, you know, octopoid aliens or little round guys with eyeballs sticking off. You know, this is the first appearance of Kodos and Kang in The Simpsons, and Sherlock the Preparer, who was voiced by James Earl Jones. And they reappeared in every Halloween special afterward. And then, of course, this is kind of saucers making a bad first impression. Wonderful, just wonderful. So much for instilling them with a sense of awe. So we've pretty much reached the end, unless I come up with a part 2. The end? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Wrapping up a little early. I did want to leave some time at the end for questions as well. So I'll get out of my little screen share here and back into this. And you can see my face again. So I hope everybody enjoyed that little presentation. I'm open to answering questions and stuff. If you guys don't mind doing just a momentary banter while I refill my water, because I'm getting a little
Absolutely.
parched
Yeah.
here. So I'll be right back.
That was so awesome. If anyone has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. So
That was
got her goblin.
I brought my goblin in honor of this conversation. The goblin
No.
also, though, is a gray.
Oh wow!
Aw.
Oh wow! No, it's funny. One of the descendants of the Hopkinsville goblin sightings folks does resin goblins on Etsy that you can buy.
Cool.
And she's really nice. There's some. She's written a couple books that are follow up. Yeah, I have one right here. This is in front. This guy hangs out with my Hellier goblin.
Love it.
Off camera here, but the little goblin that's in front of my radio also. This is something that she threw in.
Oh, that's so cool.
So, but part 2. I'm volunteering you on part 2 is the Bugs Bunny stuff. Someday.
Yeah, kind of a drag that I didn't get into that, but
we do have a question from Mark.
Okay, cool.
A very serious question. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Is he talking about an African or a European swallow?
Yay.
That was the next question. He's not answering.
That's because I read Mark's mind. Mark is always reading his own mind, so I thought I would do it for him this time.
It's kind of you to join in.
Do we have any other questions from people?
I'm waiting. You folks get your questions in there. One of the things that some of your talk reminded me of with language and kind of making the reality, didn't Keel pull off something like that in Los Angeles by writing about like a UFO sightings, or was it him and Barker together? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I don't think it was Keel. I think it was Jim Mosley.
Oh, okay.
And it was in New York. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he had called in a fake UFO sighting, but then there were other people that were actually seeing it, like in real time. You know, seeing UFOs at the place that he was trying to hoax a UFO. So it wasn't like they heard about his. It wasn't like they heard about his report and then wanted to jump on the bandwagon with it. They just simultaneously started seeing UFOs where he decided they were going to be. But
wow. Okay.
Implications of that are crazy, though, right? Because what if he just had a premonition that they were gonna see him there, right? And that's why that's what prompted him to make the hoax in the first place.
Or I'm just thinking about this little group, like of how people are depictions of Mothman have changed because of the pop culture expression of Mothman, especially kind of what you see on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember Keel writing about Mothman's ass at all. But we all
Right,
have a pretty good
right.
idea what
It's
that looks
just
like.
like that happened, and now Mothman's also ripped though. I think we're all kind of obsessed with the keister, but if you look at the rest of that statue, it's like wish I could be in the same shape Mothman is.
Yeah, Mothman lifts and does not skip leg
Right.
day. So
Well, I mean, that statue though, where that comes from is, I think, the Frank Frazetta picture that was on the cover of. He did a cover for Keel's Monsters of Mind, Space, and Time, I think it was called, and then it got re-released later under a different title. And I think the Mothman picture that Frazetta came up with, and Frank Frazetta, for people who don't know, did a lot of like fantasy art and kind of like fantasy poster art and stuff like that. A lot of like ripped dudes with swords and busty women with clothes that are falling off and dragons and stuff like that. That was kind of his sword and sorcery forte, you know. So
that's what I think of. He did a Conan thing or something that I think is like the thing I associate with him.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, totally. It's totally ripped. It's totally the guy holding the sword aloft with like the lady clinging to his leg, and there's like a volcano blowing up in the background.
Yeah.
So his usual Meilu. So when he I guess yeah. So when they were like, do Mothman, he's like kind of, I only have one speed here, bud. So this is what Mothman is gonna look like.
He could get a little bit more cartoony though sometimes. I think he did some work for Mad Magazine. So.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a while since I looked into the Frank Frazetta stuff, but
everybody, this is everybody's loving it, but I'm looking for questions here. Let me see. I don't know. Do you you're not going to address this alleged bison conspiracy in the chat at this time?
Look, I have made my point really clear on the bison conspiracy, is that I can neither confirm nor deny.
That's fair.
And I've had enough of talking about it, honestly.
So yes, okay. Chat is going. Yeah, they're going to have to live with that. That's the final word on the bison right now. I think Mark and Stardog are just going to have to accept that and move on.
Yeah, I mean, like, if anybody wants to suggest that I'm secretly a bison, or that's just plain absurd, and I don't want to talk about it, and we're moving on from that topic. This is gone past the point of even being fun for me anymore. So.
I will not put bison horns on a photo of you then, which is I was just about to do.
I will note that I have my foghorn leghorn glass. I know Stardog will appreciate that. Yeah.
That's, no.
Perfect.
Foghorn leghorn is a great character, I think. One of the things that I thought is interesting as this stuff evolves, though. You know, the spooky room at that point, they're like, oh, look at this room, and he might have been evoking like black magic. And to us in the present day, it's like, it's fun. It's just like, yeah, you've got some like, you know, kooky Halloween decorations up. That's cool. You know, the perception tends to shift over time.
I mean, that's part and parcel of, you know, my whole, I guess, thesis with this whole thing is just that their perception of these things change over time. I suppose that would have been kind of, people would have considered him a real oddball back then for having basically a Halloween chamber of horror up all year round, you know. And it's still not that usual. I mean, I don't think people here would be, people at this con this weekend would be too surprised to see that, you know. And I mean, my living room is Halloween year round, but still, to a lot of people, they might get a little freaked out by it. So
I suppose that is possible. Was that?
Yeah.
Wait, is that your bird army in the background? Is that who's? Can't even tell
Yeah.
whose audio that's coming.
Sorry, that's me. That's my blue jays never know when to shut up. So
No, that's good stuff.
Typical Blue Jay behavior.
yeah.
This is the first I've ever heard of that early colonial sighting too, which is really interesting.
Yeah, there were a couple that were recorded by Governor Winthrop, and that was also like not too far removed from the time that the Tenney clan first landed on these shores. So I think there's a connection there.
I
was gonna
see.
say those
ancestors
are
landed.
those. I got real excited because those are some of my ancestors too. I was like, oh my god, we're starting off.
Yeah, and I mean, I meant to circle back to it a little bit because there were a lot of different ways of describing lights over the ocean at the time too, where you had concepts of reports of ghost ships, because they always thought it was the souls of the dead from the ships that sunk in the harbor, or witch lights was another thing that people would report, like witches. So you had ghosts and witches, and if you were to really like scour journals and historic accounts for those subjects and cross correlate them with UFO stuff, it would be interesting to see what you come up with, because again, it's just language. We're talking about lights in the sky. There's a lot of ways to explain that, or a lot of ways to define it with the language that's applicable at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. So if you could pick, if you were going to define the language for the next thing, we're going to, in the post Tic Tac era, are we going to unidentified aerial donuts? What would you like to see?
Yes, I think donuts need to have their heyday at this point.
Okay.
We're just going to call them donuts, or cosmic donuts, because
If
cosmic donuts are good too.
We can shift the paradigm starting here this afternoon.
Aren't all donuts cosmic, really, because of their transcendent nature?
Well, there was a news article. Okay, in all seriousness, there was a news article not that long ago that posed that the universe itself may be shaped like a donut. Like it's got like a tubular form to it that's a big long circle that goes around with a hole in the middle. And
that was a joke on The Simpsons when Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, and The Simpsons keeps predicting the future, right?
Exactly.
So, right.
Have we figured out who the time traveler is on the writing staff of that show? Is it Matt Groening?
A lot of the writers were physicists. That's the thing, though. It's like people talk about like both The Simpsons and Futurama. Their writers, the people they had in there, were like from Harvard and Ivy League schools, and a lot of them had like degrees in advanced math or physics, so they can put these jokes in there and they work on various levels.
Yes.
I had no idea.
There's so many jokes that people don't even get. There was an episode of The Simpsons where Homer basically like solved an equation toward proving the existence of the Higgs boson, and years later it turned out to be right. Like
God.
But the amount of accuracy though on that show is a little eerie.
This is why we all love it.
It's on a lot of these things, on a meta level. For me, we've had a lot of talk about divination. I don't want to know. It's like I'm not watching The Simpsons, so I'm afraid something terrible will happen on the show, and I'm like, oh, it's 5 years out. But Rob is in chat. He's with you. He discussed his breakfast food theory of UFOs last night, and he is with you on the donut.
Awesome.
The donut hypothesis. I am fine living in the donut-shaped universe myself.
Yeah, all is donut. So all glory to the holy donut. But that gets back to what I was talking about, like with hilarious magic being the best magic is that I mean, I bought a pendulum a little while ago and decided to make my own pendulum board, and it's decorated with like a donut motif. And it's just like I've really kind of embraced this like holy donut, cosmic donut kind of donut magic idea. because it is. It's ridiculous, but so what? Like, ridiculous gets you good results a lot of the time. It's just unintentionally profound.
Of
It makes
course.
me laugh, so that's a channel to something. That's. I think
Well-
it's all good stuff.
Well, I think too, it's kind of that like chaos magic sensibility of like getting out of your own head. That's the point of mantras and all these other processes. So you like get out of your own way, and humor and joy and like that trickster energy. I think that gets you tapped into something a little more real than most of the mundane stuff we deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's an argument to be made, even though I didn't really get into the Bugs Bunny stuff, that Bugs Bunny is like a great portrayal of that trickster kind of idea.
Hmm.
Like he's kind of an emblematic archetypal figure for the trickster. So to have that in the mix as well, it's just that trickster energy.
Yeah.
To give an example, I've told this on a different I don't know when I told it, but it's on podcasts. Is when I was researching Ted Owens, who would like control the weather with his mind and talk to space people. I read his book on how to contact space people, and when I posted a picture of the book on Twitter, I had somebody in Texas ask me like what predictions I had based on what the space people were telling me. And I just told them, like, they told me to watch out for extreme weather for you coming from the north in the next 2 weeks. And I was just joking. It was just an off the cuff thing I said. And just kind of directing it back at them and saying, like, oh, watch out for extreme weather. And like within 2 weeks, Texas got buried under snow like they hadn't seen in like decades. And that was when all that like power outages and it was like horrifying. Like, it's like, that's not funny. But the fact that I made a joke that turned out to be 100% accurate, it happened like 10 days after I made the joke. So definitely within 2 weeks, I was like,
My God.
Oh my
and
God.
watching the weather
Well,
map where the wind patterns would normally push that my way up in the Northeast, and they just didn't this time.
right.
It just went straight down from Canada. And I was like, uncanny. That's like just doesn't happen.
Right.
There's no way I could have predicted that.
Well, we might be onto something, and we have to bring our quantum chemist back on next time for this. He's Weird Lectures is pointing out that dough etymologically means to shape, and nut is the nucleus. So again, you're tapping into that um, donut
Yeah.
energy. I don't know. There's something
Well, I'm
something
all
in
about
there.
it. Yeah, and it does. I mean, that might make me reconsider nuts and bolts then. I was being a little disparaging towards nuts and bolts before, but now that I know what nut means,
It might be there might be just progressively deeper layers of symbolism to discover on that.
Oh yeah, yep. And I'm perfectly willing to be wrong sometimes and change my mind entirely tomorrow. So
That is totally fair. I think that that seems to be a theme too on this whole weekend, keeping your mind limber and being open and not being kind of dogmatically attached to the idea, whatever the idea may be.
Yeah, don't fall into the trap.
Mm-hmm.
Keep a sense of humor, keep a smile on your face as often as you can. So we've done all about handing out the serotonins this weekend, I think. You guys have done a really good job.
I hope everybody's
you.
experiencing that too. That's very kind of you to say. I hope folks feel better, and I hope that folks that tune in and watch these later on, because I know we went like all day yesterday. We'll get some joy out of these.
Oh,
Sorry, goblins got me again. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
That's just the goblins are they want what they want. If they want to futz with you, I guess they're just going to do it.
Yeah.
So
Again, considering Mercury in retrograde, I think we've had a pretty good showing this conference.
agree 107,000,000%.
Yeah, I really can't believe. I mean, in the short time frame that you guys pulled this all together, the way things seem to have just gone off without a hitch is outstanding. Really, I mean,
Thank you.
I don't think
Yeah.
that ever really happens, and it's a tribute to you three and to all the presenters as well. You know.
Well, and again, I've talked about this the entire conference, but like this came together out of a sense of joy and out of a sense of love and out of a sense of play. And I mean, that's my personal kind of magical perspective. But I think when you're coming at any project with that kind of energy, things just work themselves out, like and in ways you don't expect. Like every single
Absolutely.
panel just blew my mind. Like every single person that we asked to be a part of this, we all like and respect. And everybody brought their A game to our tiny little conference that we put together in a month. And I'm just like endlessly moved by all of that.
Yeah, well, you know, that's manifestation for you. It's manifestation out coming from a place of joy and well-meaning, and that's something that everybody can absorb and be part of. You know, like I mean, I haven't seen any like arguments happening in those chats on the YouTube or anything. You know, like sometimes people get mean to each other in
Right.
a public forum. That didn't happen. It's
Pleasantly
just like
surprised.
Everything on Twitter, everything on Instagram, everything in YouTube has just been joyful and kind and sweet and gracious and thankful. And, you know, again, it's just this nice little feedback loop of love and play and fun.
Yeah, it's better than we allow ourselves to hope for a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
it's just hoping for it is worth it.
Yes.
I think we all needed it right now,
Yeah.
too.
Right.
As we draw to a close, I have to ask you, as we've asked all of our guests, plug the things that you have to plug.
Okay. Well, really, it's just my blog, apstrange.com, and I hope to not disappoint people too much there, but I do not get around to updating it all that often. I try. Pulling this presentation together was it is you know, it took a lot of energy on my part, and just kind of you know, I would like to get more stuff up more often, but life does get in the way and things get a bit stressful, but I'm glad that this went as well as it did. But yeah, there's some stuff on there, and I will try to update it when I can. And then just follow me on Twitter. You can yell at me there. I don't have anything to sell. I don't have anything to sell anybody. So, but definitely check out the PanParacon site and get yourself a ghost fart shirt. Oh man, I didn't work ghost farts into the presentation anywhere.
That's there's always room to expand, just like the ghost farts expand. There's time for next, because we would like to do this again.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna ask some other people to get involved, and you know, with a longer time frame and more preparation, you know.
Right. More than a month would be divine.
Right. It came up quicker than I was expecting, that's for sure. So.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, exactly.
We're like, oh, it's tomorrow.
Right? Oh yeah, that was Thursday. I thought it was Tuesday, and I just had this moment of time whiplash where I'm like, no, you got to be ready tomorrow night for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was a lot of fun though, and I'm glad everybody. I'm glad that all the people enjoyed it from YouTube, because I was on there watching all the comments go through too yesterday and the day before. So it's I think this has been a rousing success.
Thank you. And thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for including me. It's really an honor to give my first presentation here. So
yay, thank you.
Yeah. So okay, I guess
well, we can let you go and we'll wrap it up.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good.
Right.
Thank you again.
Bye.
All right. Bye.